The rain hammered the steel beams of the half-finished Chicago skyscraper as Tommy Martinez secured his safety harness one last time. It was November 1983, and the construction site buzzed with the desperate energy of workers racing against an early winter deadline. But when Tommy spotted the well-dressed businessmen standing dangerously close to the edge of the 20th floor, something in the man's hollow stare made his blood run cold. What Tommy didn't know was that this stranger, broken by bankruptcy and betrayal, had climbed those stairs with only one intention. In that split second, Tommy made a choice that would echo through decades. He abandoned his post, risked his job, and pulled a complete stranger back from the brink of death. The man whispered 2 words, "Thank you," before disappearing into the Chicago night, leaving behind only a business card that Tommy would keep in his wallet for 25 years. But what happens when that same stranger returns as one of America's richest men, and the debt he owes can only be repaid in ways Tommy never imagined? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The stranger shouldn't have been there. Tommy had been working construction for 6 years, and he knew when someone belonged on a job site. This man's expensive wool coat was already soaked through, his leather shoes slipping on the wet concrete. But it wasn't his clothes that set off alarms in Tommy's mind. It was the way he stood perfectly still while chaos swirled around him, like he was already somewhere else entirely. "Hey!" Tommy called out, dropping his rivet gun. The November wind whipped his voice away, and the man didn't turn. He just kept staring out at the city lights bleeding through the storm, his hands hanging loose at his sides. Tommy's foreman, Big Jim, was screaming something about the crane operator, but his voice became white noise. Every instinct Tommy had was focused on the stranger 20 feet away, balanced on the edge of everything. The man took a step forward. Tommy moved without thinking, his work boots pounding across the temporary flooring. He'd played high school football, and some reflexes never left you. He wrapped his arms around the stranger's waist and pulled him backward just as another gust of wind swept across the exposed floor. They both went down hard, Tommy's shoulders slamming into a pile of rebar. The stranger was lighter than he looked, all sharp angles beneath that expensive coat. For a moment they just lay there, breathing hard while the rain drummed overhead. "What the hell were you thinking?" Tommy gasped, rolling onto his side. Up close, he could see the man was younger than he'd first appeared, maybe early 30s, with the kind of pale skin that spoke of too many hours under fluorescent lights. His eyes were the color of winter sky, and they held an emptiness that made Tommy's chest tight. The stranger sat up slowly, brushing concrete dust from his coat with mechanical precision. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely audible over the storm. "I didn't mean to. I wasn't thinking clearly." "Damn right you weren't." Tommy struggled to his feet, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. "This is a hard hat zone, man. You could have been killed." Something flickered across the stranger's face. Not fear, but something darker. Would that have mattered? The question hit Tommy like a physical blow. He'd grown up in a neighborhood where people fought for every breath, where his mother worked 3 jobs just to keep food on the table. The idea that someone could throw away what others died trying to protect made him angry and sad in equal measure. "Yeah," Tommy said quietly. It would have mattered. The stranger looked at him then, really looked, as if he was seeing Tommy for the first time. "Why did you help me?" "Because that's what you do." Tommy shrugged, immediately regretting the movement. "Because everybody matters." They stood in awkward silence while the construction chaos continued around them. The stranger reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card, the expensive paper already curling from the moisture. "My name is David Chen," he said, pressing the card into Tommy's dirty palm. "I want you to know that what you did tonight, it means more than you can possibly understand." Tommy glanced down at the card. The company name meant nothing to him, but he could tell it was some kind of tech startup. "Tommy Martinez," he said, extending his hand. David's handshake was firm but brief. "Thank you, Tommy Martinez. I won't forget this." And then he was gone, disappearing down the service elevator like he'd never been there at all. Tommy stood alone in the storm, holding a business card and wondering if he'd imagined the whole thing. "Martinez!" Big Jim's voice cut through his thoughts. "You planning to work tonight or just stand there catching raindrops?" Tommy slipped the card into his wallet and picked up his rivet gun. The rain had turned to sleet by the time Jake pulled his battered Ford pickup into the parking lot of Rosie's diner. The windshield wipers scraped against glass that had seen better days, much like everything else in his life. He sat for a moment, engine ticking as it cooled, watching the neon sign flicker through the storm. Even the letter R in Rosie's had given up halfway through its attempt to stay lit. His hands still trembled slightly as he gripped the steering wheel. The image of that kid's face, pale, desperate, clinging to the bridge railing, wouldn't leave his mind. Jake had pulled over without thinking when he'd spotted the slight figure through the rain. Something about the boy's posture, the way he'd been standing on the wrong side of the guardrail, had sent alarm bells screaming through Jake's head. The conversation had been brief. The kid couldn't have been more than 19 or 20, wearing clothes that probably cost more than Jake made in a month. Private school type, by the sound of his accent. But money didn't matter when you were hanging over a 40-foot drop into the Susquehanna River. "Hey!" Jake had called out, approaching slowly like he would a spooked animal. "Whatever's going on, it's not worth this." The boy had turned, and Jake had seen something break behind his eyes. Not relief exactly, but recognition, as if he'd been waiting for someone, anyone, to notice he was there. They'd talked for 20 minutes in the driving rain. Jake never did catch the kid's full name, just heard him mumble something that sounded like Marcus, when he'd finally stepped back over the rail. The boy had been shaking so hard Jake had given him his own jacket, the heavy denim one Sarah had bought him for his birthday 3 years ago, back when they'd still believed things would work out. Now Jake pushed through the diner's door, the bell announcing his arrival with a cheerful jangle that felt inappropriate given the evening's events. The warmth hit him immediately, along with the smell of coffee and grease that had soaked into every surface over the past 30 years. "You look like something the cat dragged in," Rosie called from behind the counter. She was wiping down the same spot she'd been working on when he'd left 2 hours ago. "Thought you were heading straight home after your shift." "Got delayed." Jake slid onto his usual stool, the red vinyl cracked and patched with duct tape. "Coffee? When have I ever said no to that request?" Rosie poured without waiting for an answer, the liquid dark as motor oil and probably twice as strong. "Martha's been asking about you." Jake's stomach tightened. Martha was Rosie's sister, worked at the unemployment office downtown. If she was asking about him, it meant word was getting around that Kowalski Construction was in trouble. Not that it was much of a secret. 3 guys had been laid off just last week. What's Martha want? Same thing everyone wants these days. To know if the rumors are true about old man Kowalski selling the business. Rosie leaned against the counter, studying his face. "You've been with him, what, 8 years?" 9. Jake wrapped his hands around the mug, letting the heat seep through his palms. 9 years of getting up before dawn, of concrete dust in his lungs and steel beams that fought back when you weren't paying attention. 9 years of steady paychecks that had let him think about maybe buying a house, maybe asking Sarah to marry him, maybe being the kind of man who deserved good things. "He'll keep you on," Rosie said with the kind of confidence that came from decades of watching this town's cycles of boom and bust. "You're the best foreman he's got." Jake wanted to believe her, but the conversation he'd overheard that afternoon between Kowalski and the man in the expensive suit suggested otherwise. Words like liquidation and assets had drifted through the trailer's thin walls. The suit had been from one of those development companies that swooped in when family businesses went under, bought everything cheap, and fired anyone old enough to remember how things used to be. The bell jingled again, and Jake glanced up to see Tommy Hernandez stumble in, shaking rain from his hair. Tommy worked the night shift at the paper mill, had been doing it so long he'd developed a permanent squint from checking quality in fluorescent light. "Jesus, it's ugly out there," Tommy announced, claiming the stool next to Jake's. "Almost went off the road coming down Route 15. Some idiot in a fancy car was stopped right in the middle of the bridge, hazards blinking like Christmas. Had to swerve around him." Jake's coffee went cold in his hands as he realized Tommy was talking about the same bridge, probably the same time he'd been there with the kid. He wondered what Tommy would have done if he'd seen what was really happening. Probably called the cops, made it official. Jake had just talked to the boy like he was human, like his problems mattered to someone. Maybe that had been enough. The emergency room at St. Mary's Hospital buzzed with the controlled chaos that Marcus had come to associate with life-and-death situations. Fluorescent lights cast everything in harsh relief as he sat in an uncomfortable plastic chair, his work boots still caked with mud from the construction site. The metallic taste of adrenaline lingered in his mouth, and his hands wouldn't stop shaking. Family of David Chen? A doctor emerged from behind double doors, clipboard in hand, scanning the sparse waiting area. Marcus stood up awkwardly. "I'm not family, but I'm the one who brought him in." The doctor, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, approached him. "Dr. Martinez, you saved that young man's life. The paramedics said you pulled him from under a collapsed beam. I just did what anyone would do." Marcus shifted his weight from one foot to the other, suddenly aware of how out of place he looked in the sterile hospital environment. Not everyone would risk their safety like that. The beam you lifted weighed at least 300 pounds. You could have been seriously injured. Dr. Martinez studied him with professional curiosity. "Are you hurt? Any back pain, muscle strain?" Marcus shook his head, though his lower back did ache something fierce. "I'm fine. How is he?" "David? Stable. Broken ribs, internal bleeding that we've managed to stop, and a concussion. But he's going to make it." She paused, glancing at her clipboard. "He's been asking for you." The words surprised Marcus. In the ambulance, the young man had been barely conscious, mumbling incoherently about equations and deadlines and someone named Sarah. Marcus assumed he wouldn't even remember the rescue. Dr. Martinez led him through a maze of corridors that smelled of disinfectant and floor wax. They passed rooms filled with the sounds of suffering, labored breathing, muffled conversations, the steady beep of monitoring equipment. Marcus had always hated hospitals. They reminded him of watching his father waste away, of promises broken by circumstances beyond anyone's control. David Chen looked impossibly young lying in the hospital bed, his dark hair matted against his forehead, various tubes and wires connecting him to machines that tracked his vital signs. His eyes were alert, though, and they followed Marcus as he entered the room. "You're real," David said, his voice hoarse but carrying a note of relief. "I thought maybe I dreamed you." Marcus approached the bed cautiously. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck carrying anvils." David attempted to smile. "The doctor says you saved my life. I don't even know your name." Marcus Thompson." He felt odd saying his full name, as if he were introducing himself at a job interview rather than to someone whose life he'd just saved. "Marcus Thompson." David repeated it slowly, as if committing it to memory. "I owe you everything. You don't owe me anything, really." David studied him with an intensity that made Marcus uncomfortable. There was something different about this kid, something that went beyond the obvious fact that he was clearly educated and well off. His eyes held a sharpness, a calculating quality that suggested wheels turning behind the polite gratitude. "What do you do, Marcus? For work, I mean." "Construction. Demolition, actually. We were tearing down that old warehouse when the ceiling gave way." Marcus realized the irony even as he spoke it. "Funny thing is, if I hadn't been there to help destroy the building, you might not have needed saving. But you were there." David's voice carried a strange certainty. "Do you believe in fate?" The question caught Marcus off guard. He thought about his ex-wife, about the divorce papers he still hadn't signed, about the bills piling up on his kitchen table and the job that barely paid enough to cover rent. "I believe in bad luck, mostly. I believe in patterns, in the way seemingly random events connect to create something larger." David winced as he shifted position. "I was in that building for a meeting about funding, for a computer project I've been working on." "Computers, huh?" Marcus knew almost nothing about computers beyond the fact that they were expensive and complicated. The future, actually. David's eyes brightened despite his obvious pain. Everything's going to change, Marcus. The way we communicate, work, live our lives. And today, because of what you did, I get to be part of that change. A nurse entered to check David's vitals, and Marcus took the interruption as his cue to leave. He had work in the morning, assuming the demolition project wasn't delayed by the accident. Marcus, wait. David reached out as if to stop him. I meant what I said about owing you. Someday when I can, I'm going to find a way to repay this debt. Like I said, you don't owe me anything. Yes, I do. The certainty in David's voice was unsettling. And I always pay my debts. Walking out into the cool night air, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that something significant had just happened, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. The coffee had long gone cold by the time Marcus finished reading the letter for the third time. Sarah watched him from across their cramped kitchen table, her nurse's instincts picking up on every micro-expression that crossed his weathered face. 28 years of marriage had taught her to read the man like a well-worn book, and right now, every page screamed confusion. So this billionaire thinks he owes you something, she said finally, breaking the silence that had stretched between them like a taut wire. And his way of paying you back is to hand you his entire fortune. Marcus set the letter down carefully, as if it might burst into flames. That's what it says. Marcus. Sarah leaned forward, her voice taking on the patient tone she used with difficult patience. This has to be some kind of scam. People don't just give away billions of dollars. He wanted to agree with her. Every rational part of his mind was screaming the same thing. But there was something about the letter, something in the careful way Thomas Chen had described that night 25 years ago, that felt authentic in a way Marcus couldn't explain. He knew about the bridge, Marcus said quietly. He knew about the rain, about what I said to him. Nobody else was there, Sarah. She studied his face, and he could see the exact moment when her skepticism began to crack. Sarah had been there in the aftermath, had held him through the nightmares that followed, had watched him struggle with whether he'd done enough, whether he could have saved the others. She knew the details of that night better than anyone. Even if this Thomas Chen is real, she said, even if he really was the man you saved, this is insane. You can't actually be considering this. Marcus pushed back from the table and walked to the window that looked out over their small backyard. The grass needed cutting, and the fence was listing to one side after the last storm. In the distance, he could see the skeletal framework of a new housing development where he'd been laying foundation work before the job dried up. What if it's real? He asked, not turning around. Marcus, what if it's actually real, Sarah? He faced her now, and she could see something burning in his eyes that hadn't been there in years. What if doing the right thing that night actually meant something? She stood up, crossing to him with the measured steps of someone approaching a spooked horse. Honey, listen to yourself. This sounds like... Like what? Like hope? The words came out harder than he'd intended, and he saw her flinch. Sorry. I'm sorry. It's just... He rubbed his face with both hands. When was the last time something good happened to us, Sarah? When was the last time we caught a break? The question hung between them, heavy with the weight of all their accumulated disappointments. The failed business ventures, the medical bills from her father's cancer treatment, the steady erosion of their dreams under the relentless pressure of just getting by. We have each other, she said, but even she could hear how hollow it sounded. That's not enough anymore. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as her. I mean, it is, but... God, Sarah, I'm 60 years old. I wake up every morning and my back screams at me before my feet even hit the floor. How much longer can I keep doing this? She reached out and took his hands in hers. His palms were calloused and scarred from decades of hard work, marked by a lifetime of building things for other people. So what are you saying? I'm saying maybe I should call the number. And then what? Even if this isn't a scam, Even if this man really wants to give you his money, what happens to us? What happens to who we are? It was a question Marcus had been avoiding, but now it sat between them like an uninvited guest. He looked around their kitchen, taking in the mismatched chairs, the ancient refrigerator that hummed too loudly, the small pile of bills stacked neatly by the phone. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. They'd built this life together, one careful decision at a time. Maybe, he said slowly, we become who we were supposed to be all along. Sarah studied his face for a long moment. Then, surprising them both, she laughed, not with humor, but with something that might have been recognition. You're going to do this, aren't you? Regardless of what I say. Not regardless, but... He squeezed her hands. Yeah, I think I am. She was quiet for so long he thought she might walk away. Instead, she reached for the letter, scanning it one more time. If we do this, she said finally, if we even explore this, we do it together. No secrets, no surprises. And the minute it feels wrong, we walk away. Deal. Marcus felt something loosen in his chest, something that had been wound tight for years. Deal. The morning light filtered through the cheap blinds of Danny's studio apartment, casting thin golden strips across the rumpled bedsheets. He'd barely slept, his mind churning over Marcus Chen's impossible offer like a broken record player stuck on the same verse. $25 million. The number felt foreign in his thoughts, too large to comprehend, like trying to imagine the distance between stars. He splashed cold water on his face at the rust-stained bathroom sink, studying his reflection in the cracked mirror. The same weathered face stared back, deep lines earned through decades of sun and hard labor, calloused hands that knew only honest work. What did a man like him do with wealth beyond imagination? The business card sat on his nightstand where he'd left it, crisp white against the water-stained wood. Marcus had given him a week to decide, but Danny already knew the smart choice. Accept the money, transform his life, escape the cycle of paycheck to paycheck survival that had defined his existence for 43 years. So why did his stomach twist every time he considered it? His phone buzzed, a text from Elena. Coffee? I have news. 20 minutes later, Danny found himself sliding into the worn vinyl booth across from Elena at Rosie's Diner, their usual spot for the past 3 years. Elena Martinez was beautiful in a way that snuck up on you, warm brown eyes that crinkled when she laughed, graying hair she refused to dye, hands that moved expressively when she talked about the community center where she worked as a social coordinator. You look terrible, she said, pouring sugar into her coffee with the precision of a chemist. Thanks. You really know how to make a guy feel special. I'm serious, Danny. You've got that look, like when you're deciding whether to bid on a job you know will break your back. She leaned forward, studying his face. What's going on? Danny wrapped his hands around his mug, buying time. He and Elena had been dancing around something deeper than friendship for months now, both of them too cautious to name it. She'd been divorced for 5 years, her ex-husband having left for a younger woman and a house in the suburbs. Danny had never married, too focused on survival to build lasting connections. Remember that accident yesterday? The guy who fell into the river? The one you pulled out. Of course, it was all over the news. Her eyes softened. You never told me you were the one who saved him. Wasn't looking for credit. But here's the thing. Danny paused, realizing how insane it would sound. The guy I saved, he wants to give me money. A lot of money. Elena set down her coffee cup with deliberate care. How much money? Life-changing money, Danny. Her voice carried a warning. Please tell me you're not getting involved in something illegal. No, nothing like that. He's legitimate, made his fortune in technology, says he's been successful because I saved his life, so he wants to share that success with me. The words tumbled out faster now. $25 million, Elena. Can you even imagine? The silence stretched between them. Elena stared out the window at the morning traffic, her expression unreadable. What's the catch? She finally asked. No catch. He just wants to pay it forward, he said. There's always a catch, Danny. Always. She turned back to him, and he saw something fragile in her expression. "What happens to us if you take it?" The question hung in the air like smoke. Danny realized he'd been so focused on the impossibility of the money that he hadn't considered the ripple effects. What happened to Tuesday morning coffee at Rosie's? What happened to weekend movies and long walks through the neighborhood where they'd both grown up? What happened to the slow, careful way they'd been building something real? "I don't know," he admitted. Elena nodded as if she'd expected that answer. "I got offered a job yesterday. That's what I wanted to tell you." She managed a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Program director position in Portland. Better pay, better opportunities. Portland's pretty far from here. 3,000 miles, give or take." Danny felt something shift inside his chest, a recognition that this moment mattered more than Marcus Chen's money or his own financial struggles. When do they need an answer? End of the week. They sat in comfortable silence, two people at crossroads that seemed to diverge in opposite directions. Danny watched Elena trace patterns on the table with her finger, memorizing the gesture in case it became just a memory. "You know what's funny?" Elena said eventually. "I've spent my whole life in this neighborhood, watching people leave for better opportunities. I never thought I'd be one of them. Maybe Portland needs you more than this place does. Maybe." She looked up at him. "And maybe you need that money more than you're willing to admit." Danny reached across the table, covering her hand with his. For a moment, neither of them spoke about the choices they faced or the uncertain future stretching ahead. They simply held on to what they had, while it was still theirs to hold. The rain hammered against the windows of Marcus's apartment as he stared at the business card David Chen had left behind. 3 days had passed since their meeting at the diner, and the crisp white rectangle seemed to mock him from where it sat, propped against the sugar bowl on his kitchen table. "You're overthinking this," Sarah said, leaning against the doorframe with her arms crossed. She'd been watching him pace for the better part of an hour. "When has anyone ever offered you $1 million to do anything?" Marcus picked up the card again, running his thumb over the embossed logo. "That's exactly why I'm suspicious. Nobody gives away that kind of money without strings attached. Maybe some people do." Sarah moved into the kitchen and poured herself a cup of coffee from the pot that had been sitting too long. "Maybe you saved the life of someone who actually has a conscience." The apartment felt smaller than usual, cramped with the weight of possibility. Marcus had lived here for 8 years, ever since the divorce, and it had always been enough. 1 bedroom, a kitchen barely big enough for 2 people, walls thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Patterson's television through the plaster. Now, suddenly, it felt like a holding cell. "What if it's some kind of scam?" Marcus asked. "Rich guy gets his kicks manipulating working people, making them dance for money they'll never see." Sarah sat down at the table and gestured for him to do the same. "Then you'll be exactly where you are right now, broke, stubborn, and too proud to take help when it's offered." Marcus winced. Sarah had a talent for cutting straight to the bone. They'd been friends since high school, and she was one of the few people who could call him on his bullshit without him walking away. After his marriage fell apart, she'd been the one to help him find this place, to co-sign the lease when his credit was shot. "It's not about pride," he said, but even as the words left his mouth, he knew they were only half true. "Isn't it? You've been working construction for 25 years, Marcus. Your back's shot, your knees are worse, and you're 1 injury away from losing everything. This guy shows up offering you a way out, and you're looking for reasons to say no." Outside, thunder rolled across the city. Marcus remembered the storm from 1983, how the lightning had illuminated David Chen's face in those crucial moments on the bridge. There had been no hesitation then, no weighing of consequences, just a man in trouble and another man willing to help. "He wants me to work for him," Marcus said. "Some kind of consulting position. Says he needs someone with real-world perspective for a new project." "What kind of project?" He wouldn't say. Kept it vague. Said he'd explain everything if I agreed to meet with his team. Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying him. You know what I think? I think you're scared. Of course I'm scared. Wouldn't you be? Not of the money or the job. You're scared of what it means if this is real. If someone actually remembers what you did, thinks it was important enough to track you down after 25 years. Marcus felt something twist in his chest. Sarah was right, and he hated her for it. For years he'd told himself that what happened on the bridge didn't matter. Just something any decent person would have done. Nothing special, nothing worth remembering. But David Chen had remembered. The phone rang, startling them both. Marcus glanced at the caller ID and saw his supervisor's number. Tom Bradley, calling on a Saturday evening. That was never good news. Marcus. Sorry to bother you at home, but I've got bad news. The Henderson project got cancelled. Budget cuts. I'm going to have to lay off half the crew effective Monday. Marcus closed his eyes. The Henderson project was supposed to run through Christmas, steady work that would have carried him into the new year. How long? Could be a few months before something else comes up. Maybe longer. The economy's got everyone spooked. After Tom hung up, Marcus and Sarah sat in silence. The rain continued its assault on the windows, and the apartment felt even smaller than before. Well, Sarah said finally, I guess that makes your decision easier. Marcus picked up David Chen's business card one more time. The phone number seemed to pulse with possibility, with the promise of something he'd never dared to imagine for himself. A different kind of life, maybe. A second chance he'd never asked for but desperately needed. He reached for his phone and dialed before he could change his mind. The call connected after 2 rings. Marcus? David's voice was warm, expectant. I was hoping I'd hear from you. About that meeting with your team, Marcus said, surprising himself with how steady his voice sounded. When did you want to do this? The flight to San Francisco felt surreal. Marcus pressed his face against the small window, watching the patchwork of farmland give way to sprawling suburbs, then the glittering expanse of the Bay Area. He'd never been on a plane before, let alone first class. The leather seats, the attentive flight attendants, the complimentary everything, it all reinforced how far he was stepping outside his world. Elena had insisted on driving him to the airport, despite his protests that he could take the bus. She'd been unusually quiet during the drive, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. You don't have to do this, she'd said, as they pulled up to departures. I know. He'd squeezed her hand. But I need to understand what this is about, what it means. Promise me you won't get swept up in all the glitz. You're not that kind of man, Marcus. Don't let him turn you into someone else. Her words echoed in his mind as the plane descended through wispy clouds toward San Francisco International. What if she was right? What if this was some elaborate test he was destined to fail? The limousine waiting at baggage claim made him laugh despite his nerves. Through the tinted windows, he watched the city unfold. Steep hills crowned with Victorian houses, the iconic Golden Gate Bridge piercing through afternoon fog, glass towers reaching toward the sky like metallic prayers. Everything moved faster here, sharper, more urgent than the gentle rhythms of Nebraska. The driver, a soft-spoken man named James, navigated through downtown traffic with practiced ease. Mr. Chen wanted you to see the city a bit before your meeting, he explained. Get a feel for it. They wound through neighborhoods that felt like different countries. Chinatown with its red lanterns and narrow alleys thick with the scent of dim sum, North Beach with its Italian cafes and bohemian bookstores, the Mission with its vibrant murals telling stories of struggle and hope. Marcus found himself thinking about all the construction projects he could spot. The cranes reaching skyward, the constant renovation and reinvention. This city never stopped building itself anew. Chen's office occupied 3 floors of a sleek tower in Soma. The elevator rose silently, opening onto a reception area that looked like something from a science fiction movie. All clean lines, ambient lighting, and impossible views of the bay. The receptionist, a young woman with bright purple hair and multiple piercings, greeted him with surprising warmth. Marcus, David's been looking forward to this all week. Can I get you anything? Water, coffee, we have this amazing Ethiopian blend that'll change your life." Before he could answer, familiar footsteps echoed across the polished concrete floor. David Chen emerged from a corridor, no longer the bloodied stranger from that night 25 years ago, but unmistakably the same person. Older now, graying at the temples, wearing an expensive casual uniform of dark jeans and a perfectly fitted button-down. But his eyes held the same intensity, the same spark of desperate intelligence that Marcus remembered. "Marcus." David's smile was genuine, transformative. "You came. You paid for first-class airfare. Seemed rude to refuse." David laughed, a sound Marcus didn't remember from their first encounter. "Come on, let me show you what we've built here." The tour that followed overwhelmed Marcus's senses. Floors dedicated to research and development, where teams of young engineers hunched over prototypes for devices he couldn't begin to understand. Design studios with walls covered in sketches and mood boards. A cafeteria that looked like a high-end restaurant, serving free meals to hundreds of employees. Game rooms with pool tables and vintage arcade machines. Even a meditation garden on an outdoor terrace, complete with a small waterfall. "All of this," David said, as they stood in his corner office, gesturing toward the controlled chaos visible through glass walls, "started with that night. With you. I don't understand." David moved to a bookshelf, retrieving a small wooden box. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was a newspaper clipping, yellowed and fragile. Marcus recognized the headline, "Local Man Saves Stranger in Downtown Assault." "I kept this," David said quietly. "It reminded me that there were still good people in the world. When I was ready to give up, when the business was failing, when investors were pulling out, I'd look at this and remember that someone cared enough to help a stranger." Marcus studied the grainy photograph accompanying the article, himself at 23, uncomfortable in front of the camera, deflecting the reporter's attempts to paint him as a hero. "You could have found hundreds of people willing to help. I wasn't special. But you did help. When it mattered, when I needed it most, you were there." David's voice carried weight, certainty. "I want to return the favor. By offering me money? By offering you purpose." David moved closer, his intensity almost overwhelming. "I'm dying, Marcus. Cancer, maybe 6 months, probably less." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Outside the window, fog was rolling in from the bay, transforming the city into something dreamlike and uncertain. The morning sun cast long shadows through Marcus's kitchen window as he stared at the contract spread across his worn formica table. 3 days had passed since David Chen's visit, and the papers seemed to mock him with their pristine whiteness against the scratched surface. Sarah sat across from him, her nursing scrubs wrinkled from a double shift at the hospital. "You're overthinking this," she said, wrapping her hands around a chipped coffee mug. "When does someone like us ever get a chance like this?" Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar ache that had been his constant companion since the accident. "That's just it, Sarah. People like us don't get chances like this. There's got to be a catch. The only catch I see is your pride." Her voice carried a sharp edge he'd been hearing more often lately. "You saved that man's life, Marcus. This isn't charity, it's gratitude." Through the thin walls of their apartment, they could hear Mrs. Rodriguez's television blaring the morning news. Something about the stock market climbing, a world that felt as distant as Mars from their cramped 2-bedroom unit, where the rent consumed half of Sarah's paycheck. Marcus picked up the contract again, scanning the terms that seemed too generous to be real. $5 million for a consulting position that appeared to require nothing more than his presence and perspective. David had called it an investment in authentic leadership, whatever that meant. The medical benefits alone would cover treatments Sarah's insurance wouldn't touch, procedures that might give her the energy she used to have before exhaustion became her default state. "I keep thinking about Danny," Marcus said quietly. Sarah's expression softened. Their son, now 26 and struggling with his own construction job in Phoenix, called less frequently these days. The distance between them had grown with each missed opportunity Marcus couldn't provide, the college fund that never materialized, the help with Danny's wedding that came from Sarah's emergency savings instead of his contribution. What about him? What if this money changes things? What if it changes us? Marcus set the contract down. I've seen what money does to people. Remember Jimmy Castellano? Got that settlement from the city, moved to Westchester, and suddenly we weren't good enough for him anymore. Jimmy was always an ass, Sarah replied. Money just made it more obvious. A knock at the door interrupted them. Marcus found David Chen standing in the hallway, looking strangely normal in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Without the expensive suit, he seemed younger, more like the frightened man Marcus remembered pulling from the Hudson River 25 years ago. I hope you don't mind the surprise visit, David said. I was in the neighborhood. Sarah appeared beside Marcus, and David's face lit up with recognition. Sarah, right? Marcus told me you two got married. Congratulations, though I suppose I'm a few decades late. She laughed, despite herself. Just a few. Come in, please. You want some coffee? As they settled around the kitchen table, David's eyes moved across the contract. Having second thoughts? I'm having all the thoughts, Marcus admitted. This feels like winning the lottery, and I never bought a ticket. David nodded slowly. I understand. When I was starting my first company, my father offered to invest. I turned him down because I thought I had to earn everything myself. Took me 3 years longer to succeed, and I nearly lost everything twice. Pride can be expensive. This is different, Marcus said. I didn't do anything to earn this. You dove into freezing water to save a complete stranger, David replied. Most people would have called 911 and waited for someone else to take the risk. You didn't hesitate. Sarah reached across the table and touched Marcus's hand. He's right. That's who you are. David leaned forward. Marcus, I've spent 25 years building something meaningful, but success without purpose feels hollow. You gave me a second chance at life. Let me give you a second chance at the life you deserve. The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic and Mrs. Rodriguez's television. Marcus looked at Sarah, seeing past the tired lines around her eyes to the woman who'd stood by him through everything, the job losses, the injury, the slow erosion of dreams they'd once shared. There's one thing I need to know, Marcus said finally. This consulting work, what exactly would I be doing? David smiled. Helping me remember what matters. I've got brilliant people who can solve any technical problem, but they've never worried about making rent or choosing between medication and groceries. You have. That perspective is invaluable. Marcus picked up the pen that had been sitting beside the contract for 3 days. The weight of it surprised him. Such a small thing to carry such enormous consequences. Okay, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Let's see what happens when a construction worker becomes a consultant. As he signed his name, Sarah squeezed his shoulder, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt something he'd almost forgotten: hope. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Jake's truck pulled up to the chain-link fence. He sat behind the wheel for a moment, watching the familiar dance of workers, machinery, and purpose that had defined his life for 3 decades. Today felt different, though he couldn't quite name why. Maybe it was the weight of Marcus's business card in his wallet, or the way Sarah had looked at him over coffee that morning, not with pity or frustration, but with something that resembled hope. His phone buzzed. A text from Tommy. You coming in today, old man? Got a crew waiting on your magic touch with the crane. Jake smiled despite himself. Tommy had been his foreman for 8 years, a kid from the neighborhood who'd worked his way up from carrying tools to managing entire phases of construction. If Jake walked away now, Tommy would be ready to step into his boots. The thought should have been comforting, but instead it left him feeling strangely hollow. He climbed out of the truck and grabbed his hard hat, muscle memory guiding him through the morning routine. The site was a 12-story office complex downtown, the kind of building that would house law firms and accounting offices. Respectable work that paid decent money and kept food on tables across the city. It was honest work, important work. There he is, Tommy called out, jogging over with a clipboard tucked under his arm. Thought maybe you'd finally decided to retire and move to Florida like a normal person your age. Not quite ready for the rocking chair, Jake replied, though the words felt heavier than usual. What's the situation with the crane? Tommy's expression grew serious. Got a load of steel beams for the 9th floor, but the wind's picking up. Weather service is calling for gusts up to 35 miles per hour by noon. Most operators would call it off, but we're already behind schedule. The suits upstairs are breathing down necks. Jake looked up at the crane towering above them, its arm extended against the brightening sky. He'd operated cranes in worse conditions, but safety protocols existed for good reasons. One miscalculation, one moment of overconfidence, and people got hurt or killed. "Show me the load specs," he said, taking the clipboard from Tommy. The numbers told their own story. Heavy beams that would act like sails in high wind, requiring precision that bordered on artistry to place safely. As he studied the paperwork, Jake's mind wandered to his conversation with Marcus. The billionaire had spoken about opportunities, about the chance to build something lasting. But what was more lasting than the skyline itself? These towers of steel and concrete that would stand long after everyone who built them was gone? "Jake?" Tommy's voice cut through his reverie. "What do you think?" "We wait," Jake said without hesitation. "Schedule or no schedule, we don't risk lives for a few hours. The wind will die down after the front passes through." Tommy nodded, relief evident in his posture. "I was hoping you'd say that. The new guys are always eager to prove themselves, but they don't understand that getting home safe is the only metric that really matters." As Tommy walked away to inform the crew, Jake found himself thinking about legacy. His father had worked construction too, building homes and schools in an era when safety regulations were suggestions rather than laws. The old man had lost 2 fingers to a table saw and carried a permanent limp from a fall, but he'd never complained. "Honest work leaves honest scars," he'd always said. But what if there was another kind of honesty? What if Marcus's offer represented not an abandonment of his values, but an expansion of them? The construction workers' hands that had pulled a stranger from a burning car could do more than operate cranes and read blueprints. They could sign documents that changed lives, shake hands on deals that created opportunities for others. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. Sarah's number appeared on the screen. "Hey," he answered, stepping away from the noise of the site. "I've been thinking about what we talked about," she said without preamble, "about Marcus and his offer. And I think you should take the meeting." Jake felt something shift in his chest, a door opening that he hadn't realized was closed. "I thought you were worried about me getting in over my head." "I was. I am. But I'm more worried about you spending the rest of your life wondering, what if?" Her voice was soft but certain. "You saved someone's life once without thinking about what it might cost you. Maybe it's time to see where that choice leads." After hanging up, Jake stood at the edge of the construction site, watching the city wake up around him. Somewhere out there, Marcus Chen was probably in a boardroom making decisions that affected thousands of people, and somewhere in his wallet, a business card waited to bridge the gap between 2 worlds that seemed impossibly far apart. The wind gusted stronger, confirming his decision to postpone the crane work. Some chances, he thought, were worth waiting for the right moment to take. The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Marcus Chen's penthouse office as he reviewed the stack of documents one final time. 24 hours had passed since his offer to Jake, and the silence stretched like a taut wire. Marcus understood the magnitude of what he'd proposed. It wasn't just about money or business ventures. It was about trust, about believing that lightning could strike twice in one lifetime. His assistant knocked softly. "Mr. Chen, there's a Jake Morrison here to see you." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. "Send him in." Jake entered wearing the same worn jeans and flannel shirt from yesterday, but something in his posture had shifted. The wariness remained, but underneath it, Marcus detected a spark of something else. Curiosity, perhaps even hope. "I've been thinking about what you said," Jake began without preamble. about second chances. And? I want to hear more, but I need to understand something first. Jake's eyes were steady, searching. Why me? Really, why me? You could help 1,000 people with what you're offering. People probably more deserving than a construction worker who drinks too much and can't hold down a steady job. Marcus gestured to the chair across from his desk. Do you remember what you said to me that night, right before you pulled me out of that car? Jake frowned, concentrating. I don't know. Everything happened so fast. You said, hold on, brother, I've got you. Marcus's voice carried the weight of decades. Not sir or buddy or nothing at all. You called me brother, a stranger you'd never seen before, bleeding and trapped, and you made me family in that moment. The room fell quiet, except for the distant hum of traffic far below. That word, brother, it got me through the next 2 hours while they put me back together. It got me through months of physical therapy. And when I started my first company and every investor told me no, when I was eating ramen noodles and sleeping on a friend's couch, I remembered that someone had called me brother when I needed it most. Jake shifted uncomfortably. I just did what anyone would do. That's exactly my point. You think everyone would do it, but they don't. I've spent 25 years in business, Jake. I've met thousands of people. Most of them see what they can get before they think about what they can give. Marcus leaned forward. You saw a burning car and ran toward it. That's not common. That's rare. So, this is charity. No. The word came sharp and definitive. This is partnership. I need what you have. What could I possibly have that you need? Marcus stood and walked to the window overlooking the city. Perspective, authenticity, the ability to see people instead of assets. He turned back to Jake. I'm launching a foundation. Housing for veterans, job training programs, community rebuilding. I've got the money and the connections, but I don't have the trust. People look at me and see a billionaire playing at philanthropy. They look at you and see someone who understands what it means to struggle. Jake was quiet for a long moment. What exactly are you proposing? Come work with me. Help me build something that matters. We'll start with a salary that'll get you back on your feet, but more than that, we'll create something lasting. Housing projects that don't just warehouse people, but build communities. Programs that don't just hand out money, but restore dignity. I don't know anything about running a foundation. I don't know anything about connecting with the people we're trying to help, Marcus countered. We'll figure it out together. Jake studied the contract Marcus had placed on the desk. The numbers were staggering. More money than he'd made in the last 5 years combined. But beyond the figures, he could see the outline of something bigger. There's something else, Jake said slowly. Something I haven't told you about that night. Marcus waited. I almost didn't stop. I was drunk. Not falling down drunk, but enough that I should have just kept driving. I saw the accident, and my first thought was to mind my own business, avoid complications. Jake's voice grew quieter, but then I heard someone screaming, and I couldn't live with myself if I drove away. What changed your mind? My daughter. The words came out rough. I kept thinking, what if that was Sarah in that car? What if some stranger was her only hope, and they just drove by? He looked up at Marcus. She was only 3 then, but she'd already changed everything about how I saw the world. Marcus felt something click into place, a final piece of understanding. Where is she now? California, with her mother. I haven't seen her in 2 years. The admission seemed to cost Jake something. Maybe it's time I tried to be the kind of man she could be proud of. Then we understand each other, Marcus said quietly. Jake picked up the pen. The early morning light filtered through the Venetian blinds of Marcus's hotel room, casting sharp lines across the scattered legal documents on the desk. He'd been awake since 4, poring over the contracts that would transform the Riverside community, trying to shake the memory of Sarah's kiss and the weight of her words about trust. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Marcus opened it to find David Chen standing in the hallway, but this wasn't the composed billionaire he'd grown accustomed to. David's usually pristine appearance was disheveled, his shirt wrinkled, dark circles under his eyes. We need to talk, David said, stepping into the room without invitation, about what happened at the community meeting. Marcus closed the door, studying his benefactor's agitated state. You mean about people finally asking the questions they should have asked weeks ago? I mean about the resistance building against this project. David moved to the window, his back to Marcus. There are forces at work here that you don't understand. People who don't want to see this community succeed. What kind of forces? David turned around, his expression grave. City Councilman Rodriguez has been bought, not by me, by developers who want to see this area stay broken so they can eventually sweep in and gentrify it completely. They're feeding information to community activists, twisting the narrative about our project. Marcus felt something cold settle in his stomach. How do you know this? Because I've been fighting these same developers for months. They tried to buy me out initially, offered me prime real estate in exchange for walking away from Riverside. David's hands clenched into fists. When that didn't work, they started this whisper campaign, making people think I'm just another rich outsider coming to exploit them. Aren't you? The words escaped before Marcus could stop them. The question hung in the air between them like a blade. David's face went pale, then flushed with something that looked like hurt. After everything we've planned, everything I've shared with you about why this matters to me, you still think I'm just another predatory developer? Marcus walked to the desk, his fingers tracing the edge of the contract papers. I think you're a man with unlimited resources who's used to getting what he wants. I think you found someone, me, whose story fit the narrative you wanted to tell about yourself, and I think maybe you've convinced yourself it's all altruistic. But at the end of the day, this is still about David Chen's legacy. You're wrong. David's voice was barely above a whisper. Am I? Because Sarah seems to think Sarah Morgan is working with them. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He spun around to face David fully. What did you say? I had my security team investigate the sources of the organized resistance. Sarah Morgan has been in contact with Rodriguez's office multiple times over the past 2 weeks. She's also been meeting with representatives from Pinnacle Development Group, the same company that's been trying to kill our project. Marcus's mind reeled. The woman who'd kissed him, who'd spoken about trust and community, who'd made him question everything about this deal. You're lying. I have phone records, Marcus. Meeting logs. She's been playing both sides, gathering information about our plans while feeding intelligence to the opposition. David pulled out his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be surveillance photos. These were taken yesterday afternoon, 2 hours after the community meeting ended. The photos showed Sarah entering an upscale restaurant downtown, then sitting across from a man in an expensive suit. Their body language suggested familiarity. Intimacy even. That's Jonathan Pike, Senior VP at Pinnacle Development. They've been lovers for 6 months. Marcus stared at the images, feeling something fundamental shift inside his chest. Every conversation with Sarah replayed in his mind with new context, her questions about David's motivations, her curiosity about the project's financial details, her passionate speech about protecting the community from outsiders. Why didn't you tell me this before? Because I hoped I was wrong. Because I wanted to believe that someone could oppose us on pure principle, not because they were being manipulated or paid to do so. David's voice carried a weight of disappointment that matched Marcus's own. And because I could see you cared about her. Marcus sank into the desk chair, the legal documents suddenly feeling meaningless. How long have you known? I suspected after the first community meeting, when her questions seemed too well informed, too strategically aimed at our weak points. I had confirmation 3 days ago. 3 days. Marcus looked up at David with new understanding. That's why you've seemed different lately. Distracted. I've been trying to figure out how to tell you without destroying your faith in this project entirely. David moved closer, his expression earnest. Marcus, what we're trying to do here is still right. The people of Riverside still deserve better housing, better opportunities. Don't let their manipulation poison what we can accomplish. Marcus stood slowly, walking to the window where David had been standing. Outside, The city was waking up, people heading to jobs that barely paid enough to survive, just like he'd done for decades. "Maybe," he said quietly, "the problem isn't who's manipulating whom. Maybe the problem is that none of us really know what the community wants because we're all too busy deciding what's best for them." The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Jake pulled into the parking lot, his mind still reeling from the previous night's conversation with Marcus. The tech billionaire's words echoed in his thoughts. This is just the beginning. But the beginning of what exactly? Jake had spent half the night staring at the ceiling, trying to process the magnitude of what was happening to his life. He grabbed his hard hat from the passenger seat and noticed his hands trembling slightly. 25 years of steady work, of knowing exactly what each day would bring, and now everything felt uncertain. The irony wasn't lost on him. He'd saved a man's life without thinking twice, and now that same spontaneous decision was unraveling the careful routine he'd built to keep himself safe from disappointment. "Morning, Jake," Tommy called out from across the site. "You look like hell. Late night?" Jake managed a weak smile. Something like that. He couldn't exactly explain that he'd been offered a chance to help build something that could change the world. It sounded insane even in his own head. As the crew gathered for their morning briefing, Jake found himself studying their faces, weathered by years of sun and honest labor, marked by the satisfaction that came from building something tangible with their hands. These men had been his anchor, his identity. Who would he be without this? The foreman, Bill Morrison, distributed the day's assignments with his usual gruff efficiency. "Jake, you're on the north wall today. We need to finish the framework before the inspectors arrive Thursday." Jake nodded, but his heart wasn't in it. For the first time in years, the prospect of another day of familiar work felt suffocating rather than comforting. As he walked toward his assigned section, his phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Dinner tonight?" "I've been thinking about what you said," he typed back quickly. "Yes, my place, 7 p.m. We need to talk." The day dragged on with excruciating slowness. Every hammer strike, every measurement, every routine task felt like he was going through the motions of someone else's life. Jake caught himself looking up at the sky repeatedly, as if searching for answers in the clouds. Around noon, Tommy appeared beside him, carrying 2 sandwiches. "All right, what's going on?" Tommy asked, settling onto a stack of lumber. "You've been walking around here like a ghost all morning." Jake unwrapped his sandwich, considering how much to reveal. Tommy had been his closest friend on the crew for over a decade, but this situation defied easy explanation. "Remember that guy I pulled from the river back in '83? The one you never shut up about for 6 months afterward?" Tommy grinned. "Yeah, what about him?" "He found me." Jake took a bite of his sandwich, letting the words hang in the air. Tommy's expression shifted from amusement to confusion. "Found you? What do you mean, found you?" "He's been looking for me for 25 years. Turns out he's worth about $3 billion now, and he wants to—" Jake paused, realizing how ridiculous it would sound. "He wants to offer me opportunities, big ones." Holy shit! Tommy set down his sandwich entirely. "Like what kind of opportunities?" Before Jake could answer, his phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen, and Jake's pulse quickened. "I need to take this." "Jake," Marcus's voice was urgent. "I know this is short notice, but something's come up. There's a company in Portland, a small clean energy startup that's about to go under. The technology is revolutionary, but they're hemorrhaging money. I want to buy them out and put you in charge of turning them around." Jake stood up so quickly he nearly dropped his phone. "What? Marcus, I don't know anything about running a company, especially not a tech company. You know about building things. You understand how to take raw materials and create something lasting. This isn't that different. It's just a different kind of construction project." Marcus's confidence was unwavering. "I need someone I can trust completely, someone who won't be motivated by greed or ego. The flight leaves at 6 tonight." "Tonight?" Jake looked around the construction site. at Tommy watching him with wide eyes at the half-finished wall he was supposed to complete. "I can't just—" "Jake," Marcus interrupted gently. "Do you trust me?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Jake closed his eyes, remembering that moment 25 years ago when he'd jumped into the icy river without hesitation. He'd trusted his instincts then, acted without overthinking the consequences. "I trust you," he said quietly. "Then trust yourself. See you at the airport." The line went dead, leaving Jake staring at his phone. Tommy approached slowly, his expression a mixture of concern and amazement. "So," Tommy said carefully, "I'm guessing you won't be finishing that wall today." Jake looked at the construction site one more time, memorizing the controlled chaos he'd called home for so many years. Then he pulled off his hard hat and handed it to his bewildered friend. "Tell Bill I'm sorry about the short notice," he said, walking toward his truck. "And Tommy, wish me luck. I think I'm going to need it." The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Marcus adjusted his hard hat and surveyed the foundation they'd been working on for the past 3 weeks. The familiar weight of his tool belt felt different now, not burdensome but grounding. Elena had been right when she said clarity would come. It had, just not in the way he'd expected. His phone buzzed with another call from David's assistant. The third one this week. Marcus let it go to voicemail, just as he had with the others. He wasn't ready for that conversation yet, but he was getting closer to knowing what he wanted to say. "Thompson, you've got a visitor," called out Jimmy from across the site, jerking his thumb toward the parking area. "Some fancy lady in a Mercedes?" Marcus looked up to see Elena stepping carefully across the uneven ground, her heels clearly not designed for construction sites. She'd traded her usual business attire for jeans and a blazer, though she still managed to look elegant even while navigating around scattered rebar and cement mixers. "This is unexpected," Marcus said as she approached, removing his work gloves. "Everything okay?" "I was in the neighborhood," she said, though they both knew that was unlikely. Her eyes took in the half-finished building, the organized chaos of the work site. "I wanted to see you in your element. Not much to look at," Marcus replied, suddenly self-conscious about the dirt under his fingernails, the sweat stains on his shirt. "I disagree." Elena watched as one of his crew members called out a question about beam placement. Marcus answered without hesitation, his hands moving as he explained the structural requirements. "You know what you're doing here." 28 years of practice," he said, "though I have to admit it feels different now, knowing there are other possibilities." They walked toward a quieter section of the site, away from the noise of machinery and shouting workers. Elena moved carefully, accepting Marcus's offered hand when they stepped over a particularly rough patch of ground. "Have you decided?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer. Marcus picked up a piece of rebar, turning it over in his hands. "David saved my life that day in 1983, but not in the way he thinks. It wasn't about the money he tried to give me or even preventing me from getting hit by that car. It was about proving to myself that I could do the right thing when it mattered." Elena waited, understanding that he needed to work through this aloud. "For 25 years, I built my life around that moment. I told myself that choosing integrity over easy money was what defined me, but somewhere along the way, I started using that choice as an excuse. An excuse for what? For playing it safe, for not taking risks, for convincing myself that wanting more was somehow betraying who I was supposed to be." He set the rebar down and looked at her. "You asked me what I was afraid of losing. I think I was afraid of losing the story I'd told myself about who I am." A cement truck rumbled past, its driver waving at Marcus. He waved back automatically, the gesture so natural it was clear he belonged here in ways that went beyond just showing up for a paycheck. "So, what's the new story?" Elena asked. "Still writing it," Marcus said. "But I think it starts with understanding that accepting David's offer doesn't erase what I chose 25 years ago. It's actually the continuation of that choice." Elena smiled, the first genuine smile he'd seen from her all week. "How so?" Back then, I chose to help someone without expecting anything in return. Now someone wants to help me the same way. Maybe the brave thing isn't turning it down. Maybe it's accepting it and figuring out how to pay it forward. And us? The question came out more vulnerable than Elena probably intended. Marcus studied her face, seeing past the composed exterior to the uncertainty beneath. I've been thinking about that too, about how you fit into all this, and I realized I was making the same mistake with you that I was making with David's offer. I was so afraid of not being enough, not successful enough, not sophisticated enough, that I was ready to walk away before even trying. Elena stepped closer, close enough that he could smell her perfume mixing with the scents of concrete and steel that permeated the site. For what it's worth, she said, I think you're more than enough exactly as you are. The question is whether you believe that. Marcus looked around at the building taking shape around them, at his crew working with a precision that came from trust and experience, at the woman who'd somehow seen past his defenses to something worth pursuing. I'm starting to, he said. His phone buzzed again. David's assistant. This time, Marcus answered. Tell David I'll take the meeting, he said, but we do it here. The morning sun cast long shadows across the construction site as Marcus hammered the final nails into the community center's entrance frame. Each strike echoed with a satisfying finality. This wasn't just another job anymore. It was something he'd helped envision, something that would outlast him. Looking good, boss, called out Tommy, one of the younger workers who joined the project last month. The title still felt strange to Marcus's ears, but he'd grown into it faster than he'd expected. Marcus stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow. The building was nearly complete, its clean lines and purposeful design a testament to what happened when vision met execution. Solar panels gleamed on the roof, and through the large windows he could see the computer lab taking shape inside. Marcus! Elena's voice drew his attention. She approached with that particular stride she had when something important was on her mind. Behind her, a black sedan pulled into the gravel lot. His stomach tightened as James Chen stepped out of the car, but this time there was no entourage, no lawyers, just James, looking oddly uncertain as he surveyed the construction site. I wasn't sure you'd come, Marcus said as James approached. I wasn't sure either. James's usual corporate confidence seemed muted. Elena said you wanted to talk. Elena touched Marcus's arm gently. I'll be inside reviewing the final inspections. She gave James a polite nod before disappearing into the building, leaving the two men alone among the scattered tools and building materials. It's impressive, James said, genuinely studying the structure. Different from what I expected. What did you expect? James was quiet for a moment. Something smaller. More humble, I suppose. He turned to face Marcus directly. Elena told me about your decision, about not taking the money. Marcus had rehearsed this conversation in his head dozens of times, but now that it was happening, the words felt inadequate. It wasn't about the money being wrong, it was about it being wrong for me. $25 million was wrong for you? James's tone wasn't mocking. It was genuinely puzzled. That money was your guilt talking, not your gratitude. Marcus picked up a spare piece of lumber, running his fingers along its grain. And I was my desperation talking, not my principles. James walked closer to the building, placing his palm against the freshly painted wall. So, this is what you did instead. This is what we did instead. Marcus emphasized the word carefully. Elena helped me understand something. That day in 1983, I didn't save your life because I thought you'd become rich someday. I did it because it was the right thing to do. And now? Now I'm asking you to do the right thing too. Marcus set down the lumber and faced James squarely. Not because you owe me, but because you can. James was silent, his expression unreadable. Marcus continued. This community center will serve 5,000 people when it opens next month. Kids who need after-school programs, seniors who need social services, families who need resources. He gestured toward the building. But it's just one center, in one neighborhood. You want me to fund more of these? I want you to partner with us. Not as the guilty rich guy throwing money at a problem, but as someone who understands what it means to get a second chance. Marcus's voice gained strength. You've built something incredible with your company. You've changed how people connect, how they work, how they live. This could be the next evolution of that. James walked to the center's entrance, peering through the glass doors at the interior. Elena showed me the plans, the job training programs, the small business incubators, the childcare facilities. He turned back. It's ambitious. So was building a tech empire from nothing. A small smile crossed James's face. Touché. He was quiet for another moment, then asked, "What would you need from me?" "Funding, yes, but also expertise. Your company's resources, your network, your knowledge about scaling operations." Marcus felt the excitement building in his chest. "And your time. This can't be something you write a check for and walk away from." James nodded slowly. "A real partnership. The kind where both parties have something to gain and something to lose. And Elena? Where does she fit in this vision?" Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. "Elena fits wherever she wants to fit. She's got her own mind about these things. That she does." James's smile widened. "She also told me you two have been spending quite a bit of time together planning all this. We work well together. I'm sure you do." James extended his hand. "All right, Marcus. Let's talk about changing the world. But I have one condition." Marcus gripped James's hand firmly. "What's that?" "Next time you save someone's life, maybe give them a business card. Could save us all a lot of trouble." For the first time since this whole journey began, Marcus laughed, really laughed, and felt the weight of 25 years finally lifting from his shoulders. The morning light filtered through the hospital blinds as Jake sat beside Marcus's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. 3 days had passed since the heart attack, and the doctors remained cautiously optimistic. The machines hummed quietly, a technological lullaby that had become oddly comforting. "You know," Jake said to the unconscious figure, "I've been thinking about what you said, about legacy and making a difference." He leaned back in the uncomfortable chair, his weathered hands clasped in his lap. "Maybe I was too quick to judge. Maybe I was scared." Sarah entered carrying 2 cups of coffee, her face drawn with exhaustion. She'd barely left the hospital since Marcus collapsed, coordinating with doctors while managing the crisis at Meridian Tech. The press had gotten wind of the CEO's condition, and stock prices were fluctuating wildly. "Any change?" she asked, handing Jake a cup. "The same, but his color looks better." Jake studied her face. "When's the last time you went home?" "Home is wherever Marcus is right now." She sank into the chair beside him. "The board is getting nervous. They're talking about emergency succession plans, interim leadership. 27 years we've built this company together, and they're ready to carve it up after 3 days. Jake nodded, understanding more than she realized. He'd seen it in construction, the vultures circling the moment someone showed weakness. "Marcus mentioned you two started the company in a garage." "His parents' garage, actually. We were 23, broke, and absolutely convinced we could change the world." A smile flickered across her tired features. Marcus had this vision of technology making life better for everyone, not just the wealthy. That's what drove him then, and it's what drives him now. Even with the foundation work. "Especially with that." Sarah's voice grew stronger. "You should see him when he talks about the schools we've built, the clean water projects, the medical clinics. He lights up like that kid in the garage again." She paused, looking at Marcus's still form. "That's why your answer matters so much to him, Jake. You represent something pure, someone who helped without expecting anything in return." Jake felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "What if I'm not the right person for this? What if I let him down? You saved his life once already. I think you've earned the benefit of the doubt." A soft knock interrupted them. Elena stood in the doorway, flowers in her hands and uncertainty in her eyes. "I hope it's okay that I came. I've been worried." Jake stood quickly. "Of course it's okay. Sarah, this is Elena Martinez. She's been helping me understand some things about Marcus's offer. Sarah extended her hand warmly. Any friend of Jake's is welcome here. And thank you. I know you've been a good influence on him during all this. Elena's cheeks colored slightly. I don't know about that, but I do know Jake's been wrestling with this decision for all the right reasons. The doctor said talking to him might help, Sarah mentioned. His brain activity increases when he hears familiar voices. Elena nodded toward Jake. Why don't you tell him what you've decided? Jake felt both women's eyes on him. He hadn't realized until that moment that his decision had already crystallized somewhere in the quiet hours of sitting vigil. Moving closer to the bed, he reached out and gently touched Marcus's arm. Marcus, it's Jake. I've been doing a lot of thinking, and I need you to know something. His voice grew steadier. 25 years ago, I helped you because it was the right thing to do, no other reason. But you've shown me that one good deed doesn't have to be the end of the story. It can be the beginning. The heart monitor's rhythm seemed to quicken slightly. I'm in, Jake continued. I'll take the job, run your foundation, try to make a difference. Not because of the money, though I won't pretend that doesn't matter, but because you've reminded me that having a purpose is worth more than just getting by. A tear rolled down Sarah's cheek. Elena moved closer, her hand finding Jake's shoulder. There's one condition, though, Jake added with a slight smile. You need to wake up and help me figure out how to do this right. I'm going to need all the guidance I can get. For a moment, nothing changed. Then Marcus's fingers twitched almost imperceptibly. His eyelids fluttered, and a soft groan escaped his lips. Marcus? Sarah was on her feet instantly, pressing the call button for the nurse. Marcus's eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding Jake's face. His voice was barely a whisper, but his words were clear. I knew you'd say yes. Jake laughed, surprising himself with the sound. You couldn't have just sent a text like a normal person? Where's the drama in that? Marcus managed a weak smile. Besides, I wanted to make sure you really meant it. As medical staff rushed in, Jake stepped back, Elena's hand still on his shoulder, and realized that his life had just changed direction once again. Marcus stood in the gleaming boardroom of Chen Technologies, his calloused hands resting on the polished mahogany table. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, San Francisco's skyline stretched endlessly, a testament to dreams realized and fortunes made. 25 years ago, he'd been wearing a hard hat and work boots, pulling a stranger from twisted metal. Now that same stranger sat across from him, offering to make him wealthy beyond imagination. The foundation will need a director, David Chen said, his voice steady but eyes betraying decades of gratitude. Someone who understands what it means to struggle, to make impossible choices, someone who won't lose sight of the people we're trying to help. The irony wasn't lost on Marcus. He'd spent the past month wrestling with whether to accept David's original offer, a lump sum that would solve every financial worry he'd ever had. Now David was proposing something entirely different, not wealth but purpose. You're asking me to run a charity, Marcus said, his voice carrying a note of uncertainty. David, I barely finished high school. I've spent my whole life swinging hammers and laying foundation. You saved my life without thinking about the cost, David replied. You've raised 2 kids as a single father while working 3 jobs. You've kept a neighborhood together when everyone else gave up on it. Tell me what MBA program teaches those skills. Sarah squeezed Marcus's hand under the table. She'd been quiet during most of the meeting, but he could feel her silent support. After everything they'd been through, the awkward reunion, the careful navigation of old feelings, the gradual rebuilding of trust, she understood him better than anyone. The budget would be substantial, David's assistant, Jennifer, added, sliding a folder across the table. Initial funding of $50 million, with annual allocations based on impact assessment. You'd have complete autonomy over program development and implementation. Marcus opened the folder, scanning numbers that made his head spin. It wasn't money for him. It was money for people like him. Families facing eviction, kids aging out of foster care, veterans struggling with addiction, workers whose bodies had given out before their savings had grown. There's something else, David said, his tone shifting. "I've been diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's. It's manageable now, but I want to see this foundation established while I can still be involved. This isn't just about repaying a debt, Marcus. It's about creating something that will outlast both of us." The room fell silent except for the distant hum of traffic far below. Marcus thought about his daughter Emma, now in college on a scholarship, but still calling home worried about money. He thought about his son Jake, talented and ambitious, but afraid to dream too big. He thought about Mrs. Rodriguez next door, choosing between medication and groceries. "I'd want to start in my neighborhood," Marcus said finally. "Not just write checks, but actually understand what people need. Housing assistance, job training, healthcare navigation, the kind of help that doesn't make people feel like charity cases." David smiled, the first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him all day. "That's exactly what I hoped you'd say." Sarah leaned forward. "What about existing organizations? There are already non-profits doing this work." "We'd partner with them," Marcus said, surprising himself with how quickly the ideas came. "Fund them, learn from them, amplify what's already working. This isn't about replacing good programs, it's about scaling them up." Jennifer nodded approvingly. "We've prepared a preliminary list of potential partners. Local housing authorities, community colleges with job training programs, health clinics in underserved areas. The salary would be competitive," David added. "Not billionaire money, but enough that you'd never have to worry about your own family's security while you're helping others." Marcus stood and walked to the window. The city sprawled below him, full of people fighting daily battles for dignity and survival. He'd been one of them for so long that the view from this height felt surreal, but maybe that was exactly why he was the right person for this job. When he turned back to the table, his decision was clear. "I have conditions. I want Sarah involved as a consultant. She understands systems and bureaucracy better than anyone. I want my kids to see what we're building, to be part of it if they choose, and I want quarterly reports that show real impact, not just feel-good statistics." "Done," David said immediately. Marcus extended his hand across the table. "Then let's do this. Let's build something that matters." As they shook hands, Marcus felt the weight of possibility settling around him. This wasn't the ending he'd imagined when David first walked back into his life. It was something better, a beginning he'd never dared to dream. The rain drummed against the windows of Marcus's apartment as he sat at his kitchen table, staring at the contract spread before him. Elena had been gone for 3 hours, but her words still echoed in his mind. "Choose carefully, Marcus. This decision will define who you become." His phone buzzed. A text from David. "Board meeting tomorrow at 9 a.m. Final answer needed." Marcus rubbed his temples. 24 years of construction work had taught him to build things that lasted, to measure twice and cut once. But this decision felt like standing on the edge of a precipice, unable to see the bottom. He walked to the window, watching the city lights blur through the rain. Down below, people hurried along the sidewalks, their umbrellas bobbing like black flowers in the wind. Each one had their own struggles, their own dreams deferred, just like he had for so many years. The memory of that day in 1983 felt both distant and immediate. He could still see David's face, pale and desperate, trapped beneath that beam. Marcus hadn't thought about consequences then. He'd simply acted. Now, every action seemed to carry the weight of 1,000 possibilities. His phone rang. Sarah's name lit up the screen. "Dad? I know it's late, but I couldn't sleep." Her voice sounded small, younger than her 28 years. "What's on your mind, sweetheart?" "I keep thinking about what you said earlier, about being proud of the life you built." She paused. "I need you to know that I am proud, not because of what you might become, but because of who you've always been." Marcus felt his throat tighten. "Sarah, when I was 12 and broke my arm falling off my bike, you carried me 6 blocks to the hospital because it was faster than waiting for an ambulance. When Mrs. Patterson's roof caved in during that ice storm, you spent your entire weekend fixing it for free. When I needed help with college, you worked double shifts for 2 years without complaint. Her voice grew stronger. That's who you are, Dad. That's who you've always been. After they hung up, Marcus found himself thinking about legacy, not the kind measured in dollars, but the kind measured in moments. The small kindnesses that rippled outward, touching lives in ways you might never fully understand. He picked up the contract again, reading the fine print he'd memorized by now. $20 million, a seat on David's board, a chance to help direct resources toward projects that could change lives. It was everything he'd never dared to dream of, and everything that terrified him. But as he read, a different possibility began to take shape. A third option that neither David nor Elena had mentioned. The next morning dawned grey and cold. Marcus arrived at David's office building 30 minutes early, using the time to walk the surrounding blocks. He passed a homeless shelter, a community center with peeling paint, and a small park where mothers pushed strollers despite the chill. This was David's neighborhood now, gleaming towers rising above forgotten corners. David was waiting in the conference room, along with 3 board members Marcus had met the day before. The contract sat in the center of the polished table like a small monument to possibility. Marcus. David stood, extending his hand. I'm hoping you have good news for us. I do, Marcus said, taking his seat, but probably not the news you're expecting. David's expression flickered with uncertainty. I'm listening. Marcus pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket, his own handwriting on yellow legal pad pages. I've been thinking about what you said, about paying forward the kindness I showed you, about using resources to change lives, and I want to propose an alternative. Marcus spread his notes on the table. Instead of giving me $20 million, I want you to create a foundation, fund it with $50 million, and let me help run it. Not as a billionaire philanthropist, but as someone who understands what it's like to need a second chance. The room fell silent. One of the board members leaned forward, frowning. You're turning down personal wealth to manage our charity work? I'm proposing that we work together to build something bigger than either of us could create alone. Marcus looked directly at David. You saved my life by finding me. Let me save others by helping you see them. David was quiet for a long moment, his fingers drumming against the table. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a note of wonder. 25 years ago, you pulled me out from under that beam. Today, you're trying to pull me out from under something else entirely. Sometimes, Marcus said, the most radical thing you can do is remember who you are, instead of trying to become someone else. David smiled. The first genuine smile Marcus had seen from him. Tell me more about this foundation. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the construction site as Jake Matthews stepped out of his truck for what he knew would be the last time as just another worker. In his pocket, the certified check seemed to weigh nothing and everything all at once. $25 million, enough to change not just his life, but the lives of everyone he cared about. Sarah emerged from the passenger side, her hand finding his as they stood before the skeletal frame of what would become downtown's newest office complex. The irony wasn't lost on him that his transformation would begin at a construction site, the very place where his story with David Chen had started 25 years ago on that rain-soaked December night. You don't have to do this today, Sarah said softly, reading the mixture of excitement and apprehension in his eyes. Yes, I do. Jake squeezed her hand. I've been thinking about what David said, about purpose and responsibility. This money isn't just mine. It belongs to everyone who helped me become the man I am today. They walked toward the trailer where his crew was already gathering for the morning briefing. Through the window, Jake could see Tommy adjusting his hard hat, Miguel reviewing blueprints, and Big Jim pouring coffee from the communal pot that had seen better decades. These men had been his family when he had nothing else, sharing their lunches when his wallet was empty, covering for him when Elena was sick and he needed to leave early. The trailer fell silent as Jake entered with Sarah. 12 pairs of weathered eyes looked up, sensing something different in their foreman's demeanor. Boys, Jake began, his voice steady despite the emotion building in his chest. I need to tell you something. He explained everything. The rescue 25 years ago, David's unexpected appearance, the incredible gift that had just changed his world. As he spoke, he watched their faces cycle through disbelief, amazement, and something that looked almost like loss. "So you're leaving us," Tommy said finally, his young voice trying to hide disappointment. "Not exactly." Jake reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder of documents he'd spent the previous evening preparing. "I'm starting a construction company, Matthews & Sons, and I'm offering every one of you a partnership." The silence stretched longer this time. "I know what it's like to break your back for someone else's dream," Jake continued. "I know what it feels like to wonder if you'll ever be more than a day laborer. This is our chance to build something together, to be the company we always wished we worked for." Miguel was the first to speak. "You're serious about this, Jake?" "Dead serious. Equal partnerships, profit sharing, full benefits for everyone's families. We'll bid on the projects we want, work for clients who respect what we do." Jake looked around the room. "David Chen taught me that wealth isn't about what you accumulate, it's about what you create. I want to create something with the best men I know." Big Jim cleared his throat, his gruff exterior cracking slightly. "In 40 years of construction, nobody's ever offered me anything like this." "Well, what do you say, Jim? Ready to help an old friend build something bigger than both of us?" One by one, they stepped forward. Handshakes became embraces, and the trailer filled with an energy Jake hadn't felt since Elena was alive, the electricity of possibility, of dreams taking shape. Later that afternoon, Jake found himself standing in the cemetery where Elena rested. Sarah waited respectfully by the car as he knelt beside the headstone, brushing away leaves that had gathered since his last visit. "I know you always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself," he whispered. "You used to say that every ending was just a beginning in disguise. I think I finally understand what you meant." The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment, Jake could almost hear Elena's laughter, feel her hand in his. "I'm going to do right by this gift, Elena. I'm going to help people, build something that matters. And Sarah," his voice caught, "I think you'd really like her. She sees the world the way you did, full of second chances and hidden blessings." As he walked back to Sarah, Jake felt lighter than he had in years. Not because of the money, but because of the clarity it had brought. David Chen had been right. True wealth wasn't measured in dollars, but in the lives you touched, the dreams you helped fulfill, the legacy you left behind. Tomorrow, he would begin building something even more important, a second chance at the life he'd always dreamed of, one good deed at a time,